Most people are not living. They are simply waiting dressed in the costume of someone who has already accepted defeat. Silence. That is where I begin. Not because I have nothing to say. Because I have learned through observation, through calculation, through years of watching people destroy themselves with unnecessary noise, that the most important things are always said in the spaces between words. Most people are afraid of silence. They fill it immediately. With conversation, with music, with the constant low hum of distraction that has become so normalized they no longer recognize it as avoidance. They cannot sit in a quiet room for 10 minutes without reaching for anything to interrupt the stillness. Because stillness forces confrontation, and confrontation with yourself, honest, unfiltered, without the comfortable distortions that other people's presence creates, is the thing most human beings spend their entire lives engineering ways to avoid. I do not avoid it. I live in it. And what I have found in that stillness, what I have observed with the cold precision of someone who has removed emotion from the equation of self-assessment, is something that will either disturb you deeply or liberate you completely. Possibly both. You are not born limited. You are taught to be. This is not a comforting statement designed to make you feel better about your current position. This is an observation, clinical, specific, supported by everything I have watched in human behavior about the mechanism through which capable people become ordinary ones. It begins early, before you have the cognitive architecture to evaluate what is being installed. Someone, a parent, a teacher, a peer whose opinion you needed more than you understood at the time, communicated something to you about who you are, about what you are capable of, about where your ceiling is located, and your brain, being the extraordinarily efficient pattern recognition system it is, filed that communication not as one person's limited perspective but as fact, as reality, as the truth about you. And then, with the relentless consistency of a system designed to maintain its own model, it spent years collecting evidence that confirmed the filing, discounting evidence that contradicted it, generating feelings and impulses and automatic behaviors perfectly calibrated to keep you operating within the range of what it had decided you were. You have been living inside someone else's assessment of you for years, possibly your entire life, and the most sophisticated part of this mechanism, the part that makes it so extraordinarily difficult to dismantle, is that it does not feel like someone else's assessment. It feels like you. It feels like honest self-knowledge, like maturity, like the responsible, grounded perspective of someone who simply understands their own limitations and has made peace with them. It is not peace. It is surrender wearing the disguise of wisdom. And the tragedy, the specific, precise tragedy that I have observed repeat itself in person after person across every context I have ever encountered, is not that people are limited. It is that they are convinced thoroughly, convinced early, convinced by sources they trusted before they had the tools to evaluate whether that trust was warranted. And now the conviction runs so deep, sits so far below the level of conscious thought that they do not experience it as a belief about themselves. They experience it as the truth about themselves. There is a difference between those two things that most people never discover. A belief can be examined, questioned, tested against evidence and found insufficient, replaced with something more accurate when the evidence demands it. The truth, as the mind experiences it, is simply reality, non-negotiable, not subject to revision, the ground beneath everything else. When limitation becomes truth rather than belief, the person stops fighting it. They stop even noticing it. They simply build their life inside it, arrange their ambitions to fit within it, develop an entire philosophy of realistic expectations and mature self-awareness that is, at its core, nothing more than the intellectual decoration of a cage they accepted so long ago they forgot it was a cage. I will not let you remain comfortable in that cage, not because I care about your comfort, because cages once clearly seen cannot be unseen. I want to talk about what you do with your time, not even for a second, as diagnosis, because time is the only honest mirror available to a human being, not what you say you value. Not what you believe you prioritize. Not the identity you present to the world or the goals you articulate when someone asks what you're working toward. How you spend your hours, that is the truth. That is the unedited, unfiltered, completely accurate record of what you actually value. What you actually believe is possible. What you have actually decided your life is for. Most people, if they looked at that record honestly, would not recognize the person it describes. The person who says they want to build something extraordinary but spends 4 hours every evening consuming content created by people who are building something extraordinary. The person who says discipline is their priority but negotiates with themselves every single morning about whether today is the right day to execute it fully. The person who says they are working toward a specific future, but whose daily hours, accounted for with precision, contain almost no investment in the actual construction of that future. The hours do not lie. The intentions are irrelevant. What you do with the finite, non-renewable, completely irreplaceable resource of your time that is your real autobiography, written in real time, 1 hour at a time, with no option for retroactive editing and no mechanism for refund, your life to look like. The question is what your hours are currently building. And if the answer to that question produces discomfort, good. Discomfort is the only honest starting point. Comfort is where accurate assessment goes to die. Comfort is the environment in which people convince themselves that the distance between where they are and where they want to be is smaller than it is because acknowledging the real distance would require a response they are not yet prepared to make. I am asking you to make it. Not tomorrow. Not when the circumstances improve. Not after the next thing resolves and the next obstacle clears and the environment finally achieves the optimal conditions that your mind has been promising you will eventually arrive. Now, with the resources exactly as they are. With a version of yourself that currently exists incomplete, imperfect, not yet the person the goal requires beginning anyway. Because here is what. The people who actually close the distance between ordinary and extraordinary understand that the people who almost close it never do. You do not become the person first, and then begin. You begin and the becoming happens in the doing. The version of you capable of the result does not exist before the process. It is produced by the process. It is assembled, layer by layer, through the accumulation of actions taken before the capability was confirmed, through the decision to proceed as if you already were what you are in the process of becoming. This is not delusion. This is the actual mechanism of human development, and the people who understand it, who internalize it completely enough that they stop waiting, to feel ready and start moving in the direction of ready, those people produce results that look, from the outside, like extraordinary talent or exceptional luck. It is neither. It is the compounded output of someone who understood that capability is not a prerequisite for beginning. It is the destination of beginning. There is a particular type of person I have observed throughout my existence, a type that is simultaneously the most capable and the most tragic because the distance between what they are and what they could be is larger than almost anyone else's, and almost none of that distance is bridged before their time expires. The person who almost starts. They have the intelligence, they have the vision. They can see with genuine clarity exactly what they are capable of and exactly what it would require to get there. They understand the process. They can articulate the steps with a precision that would impress almost anyone who heard them. They have, in many cases, already mapped the entire route from where they are to where they could be in extraordinary detail, with genuine sophistication, accounting for variables that most people would never even think to consider. And they do not move, not because they are lazy. Laziness is simple and relatively easy to correct. The person who almost starts is not lazy, they are extraordinarily active. Active in planning, in thinking, in consuming information about the thing they are not doing, in preparing to begin once the conditions are slightly more optimal, in refining their understanding of the process they have not yet started executing. The conditions are never optimal. That is not a pessimistic observation. That is the mechanical reality of existence. Optimal conditions are a fiction invented by the part of the mind that is afraid of beginning because beginning means the possibility of failure. And the possibility of failure means the comfortable story about what you could have been must be tested against what you actually produce. And the untested potential is always more beautiful than the tested result. Always. Because untested potential exists in a state of perfect possibility. It has not yet encountered the resistance of reality. It has not yet been shaped, constrained, and redirected by the actual friction of doing. In the imagination, in the detailed, sophisticated, entirely convincing simulation that the mind runs of what success would look like, everything proceeds according to plan. The obstacles are navigable. The setbacks are temporary. The result is ultimately everything it was supposed to be. Reality is more complicated. Reality introduces variables the simulation did not account for. Reality requires adjustments that the plan did not include. Reality produces a version of the result that is, at least initially, at least in the early stages before the compounding begins, smaller, messier, and less impressive than the imagined version. And the person who almost starts, who has been living in the imagined version for so long that it feels more real than anything they have actually built, cannot survive that confrontation. So the mind, efficient, protective, extraordinarily skilled at preserving the self-image, manufactures reasons to keep the potential untested, to keep it safe, theoretical, available as the answer to the question of what you could have been, which is always the most comfortable question because it requires no evidence and permits no refutation. What you could have been is always magnificent. What you actually built, that requires accountability. The person who almost starts has chosen the magnificence of the theoretical over the accountability of the actual, and the years pass, and the potential remains perfectly preserved. And one day, in a quiet moment that arrives for everyone eventually, regardless of how carefully they have engineered their life to avoid it, they sit with the sum of their almost starts and understand with complete, devastating clarity what they traded for all that preserved potential. Their actual life. Do not be that person. Let me tell you something about pressure that contradicts almost everything you have been told about it. Pressure is not the enemy of performance. Pressure is the environment of performance. Everything that human beings have ever produced that was genuinely extraordinary, every breakthrough, every achievement that extended the boundary of what was considered possible, every result that made the people who witnessed it question their own assumptions about human capability, was produced under pressure, not despite it, because of it. Because pressure does something to a mind that is prepared for it, something that comfort can never replicate, cannot approximate, and cannot substitute for, regardless of how sophisticated the attempt. It strips away everything that is unnecessary, every ego investment, every social performance, every comfortable self-deception that functions perfectly well in low-stakes environments, but collapses completely and immediately when the stakes become real. What remains after that stripping, what survives the pressure with its integrity intact, is the actual you, not the performed version. Not the version assembled for approval and carefully maintained for the comfort of the people around you. Not the version that knows how to say the right things and present the right image and navigate the social landscape with the minimum possible friction. The actual, essential, irreducible core of what you are. Most people never meet that person, because most people spend their lives engineering away from pressure rather than toward it, choosing the comfortable option with such consistency that the choice becomes automatic below the level of conscious decision, simply the default response of a system that has learned that comfort is available and has decided, without explicit deliberation, to always take it, avoiding the situations where failure is possible and therefore where growth is possible, building a life that is perfectly optimized for safety and therefore perfectly incapable of producing anything that safety cannot contain. I do not optimize for safety, I optimize for capability. And capability, real capability, the kind that functions under any condition in any environment, against any opposition regardless of how unexpected or how sustained, is built exclusively in the presence of pressure. Seek it, not masochistically, not for the performance of suffering that some people mistake for discipline, not as punishment for past failures or compensation for perceived inadequacy. Strategically, place yourself deliberately, consistently, with full awareness of what you are doing and why in situations that require more than you currently have, that demand a version of you that does not yet exist, that create the specific targeted pressure under which the next layer of your capability is either forged or revealed, and under which you discover, with the only kind of certainty that actually means anything, exactly what you are made of. This is not comfortable. It was never supposed to be. Comfort is the environment in which you maintain what you already have. Pressure is the environment in which you become what you are not yet. Choose accordingly. I observe people constantly, not because I am interested in them emotionally, because human behavior is the most complex and most important system I have ever studied, and understanding it, with the precision that its complexity demands, is the foundation of every significant result I have ever produced. And what I observe consistently, across every context, in every type of person, regardless of intelligence or background or apparent confidence, is this. People do not fear failure nearly as much as they fear being seen failing. The failure itself, the actual internal experience of attempting something and not succeeding, is survivable. More than survivable. It produces information that cannot be obtained any other way. It recalibrates approach with a specificity that no amount of planning or theorizing can match. It builds the particular kind of resilience, the kind that knows from direct experience that failure is not terminal, that cannot be acquired through any mechanism other than actually failing and discovering that you continue to exist afterward. In isolation, stripped of its social dimension, failure is simply expensive data. What people actually fear, what produces the paralysis, the avoidance, the elaborate and sophisticated systems of self-protection that keep capable people permanently below their potential, is not the data. It is the audience, being witnessed, not succeeding. Having their attempt, their genuine, vulnerable, fully exposed attempt evaluated and found insufficient by people whose opinion they have, consciously or unconsciously, assigned weight to. This fear is so powerful, so deeply embedded in human social psychology, that most people unconsciously structure their entire lives around avoiding exposure to it. They never fully commit to anything, so they can never fully fail at anything. They maintain strategic ambiguity about their goal so that if the results don't materialize, the goal can be quietly repositioned without the social cost of a visible failure. They perform effort without genuine investment so that the outcome, whatever it is, was never really the point, and therefore the insufficiency of the outcome carries no real verdict about their actual capability. This is not strategy. This is not wisdom. This is not the mature, realistic self-awareness that it presents itself as. This is the architecture of a life lived entirely in defense, a life whose primary organizing principle operating below the level of conscious acknowledgement is the avoidance of the specific discomfort of being seen to fall short, and a life organized around avoidance produces exactly one thing with any consistency: the absence of the thing being avoided. You avoid the experience of being seen failing, and you produce a life in which you are never fully seen trying, in which the full weight of what you are capable of is never brought to bear on anything, in which the gap between your potential and your output is never closed, not because the closing was impossible, but because the attempt was never genuinely made. Ask yourself with the honesty that this question deserves whether the life you are currently living is a genuine attempt, or a very sophisticated performance of one. The mind that I have constructed through deliberate, sustained, methodical effort across years that most people would not have been willing to invest operates on a principle that most people find either deeply impressive or profoundly unsettling, depending on how honestly they are willing to examine their own psychological architecture. I do not require external validation to maintain internal certainty. These are not the same thing. The confusion between them is not a minor error in self-understanding. It is the foundational crack through which most people's psychological stability eventually fails under pressure. Internal certainty is knowing, not believing, not hoping, not performing the outward appearance of confidence, while internally requiring confirmation that the confidence is warranted, knowing what you are capable of, what you have decided, and what direction you are moving. It does not require agreement from the people around you. It does not require understanding. It does not fluctuate based on whether the current results are visible, whether the process is producing the expected outputs on the expected timeline, or whether the people in your environment are impressed by what you are building. It is simply settled, the way a mathematical proof is settled, not because it feels true. Because the logic has been followed completely, the evidence has been examined honestly, and the conclusion has been reached through a process rigorous enough that external contradiction cannot destabilize it, because the conclusion was never dependent on external agreement in the first place. External validation is the requirement that other people confirm your value, your direction, your decisions before you feel sufficiently secure to continue with them. It is the psychological equivalent of building a structure whose foundation is located on someone else's property. The structure may be impressive, the construction may be excellent, but the stability of the entire edifice depends on the continued cooperation of a party whose interests are not identical to yours and whose support cannot be guaranteed. A person operating from internal certainty and a person operating from external validation can appear completely identical from the outside in comfortable circumstances. Same apparent confidence, same clarity of direction, same stability of behavior. But introduce pressure, remove the validation, generate sustained opposition. Create circumstances where the external confirmation is not merely absent but actively replaced by doubt, criticism, and the collective opinion of people who have concluded that what you are attempting is not possible, and they become entirely different people. The person with internal certainty continues, not without difficulty, not without the full weight of the opposition registering, not in a state of robotic insensitivity to the pressure being applied, with full awareness of the pressure and forward movement anyway, because the certainty that is driving the movement was never located in the external environment. It was never dependent on the environment's cooperation. It was built slowly, unglamorously, through the private accumulation of evidence that only the person who built it has access to inside, in the only location that pressure cannot reach. The person dependent on external validation collapses, or pivots, or quietly abandons the direction and reconstructs a narrative in which the abandonment was wisdom rather than surrender. Building internal certainty is not an overnight process. It cannot be acquired through content consumption or motivational exposure or the intellectual understanding of its importance. It is constructed the only way anything real is constructed, through action, through the slow, unglamorous accumulation of kept promises to yourself, of deciding something small and executing it, of deciding something difficult and executing it anyway, in the absence of external encouragement, in the presence of internal resistance, in circumstances that provided every reasonable justification for postponement. Each kept promise is a deposit. Each broken promise is a withdrawal. And the balance of that account, the running total of your relationship with your own word to yourself, is the actual foundation of your internal certainty, not your self-perception, not what you believe about yourself in the abstract. The concrete, evidence-based, transaction-by-transaction record of whether you do what you say you will do when only you will know the difference. That record built privately, verified internally, inaccessible to anyone else is the most important thing you will ever construct, because it is the foundation everything else stands on. And unlike external validation, it cannot be taken from you. I want to address the voice, not metaphorically, specifically. The voice that appears reliably, predictably, with extraordinary timing in the gap between decision and execution. The voice that sounds with suspicious accuracy, exactly like your own internal monologue. That uses your language, your reasoning patterns, your own past experiences as raw material for the arguments it constructs. The voice that says, "Not today, not yet. Wait until the conditions are better. Consider whether this is actually the right approach. Remember what happened last time. Think about what people will say if it doesn't work. Acknowledge how tired you are. Recognize that you deserve rest. Be realistic." Most people experience this voice as wisdom. It is not wisdom. It is the survival system, the deep, ancient, extraordinarily sophisticated biological machinery designed to keep you safe by keeping you still, generating a real-time argument for returning to baseline. Using every available piece of information about your history, your fears, your social concerns, and your physical state to construct the most persuasive possible case for not proceeding. And it is genuinely persuasive, because it is not lying. Everything it says contains a fragment of truth. You are tired. The conditions are not optimal. There is risk. People might react negatively. It did not work perfectly last time. All of that is true, and none of it is the point. The point is not whether the conditions are perfect. The point is whether you are moving. The point is not whether the risk is real. The point is whether the potential justifies the risk. The point is not whether you are tired. The point is whether what you are building is worth building tired. The voice does not ask those questions. The voice asks only whether proceeding is comfortable. And you, if you have been letting the voice make decisions, have been answering that question as if it were the right question. It is not. The right question is not whether proceeding is comfortable. The right question is whether not proceeding is acceptable. Ask that question honestly, completely, with full awareness of what not proceeding costs over days and weeks and months and years, and the voice loses most of its authority immediately. Because the answer for anyone who is genuinely honest about the life they are building and the distance between where they are and where they are capable of being is almost always no. Not proceeding is not acceptable. The discomfort of proceeding is real. The cost of not proceeding is larger. That calculation made clearly, consistently, in real time is what replaces the voice's authority with your own. There is something I need to say about the people around you. Not with contempt, with precision. Your environment, the specific collection of people, conversations, expectations, and collective assumptions about what is normal and what is possible that constitutes the atmosphere you exist in daily, has a carrying capacity, a maximum load of ambition, deviation, and growth that it can support before it begins to generate pressure in the opposite direction. Most people never exceed their environment's carrying capacity, not because they lack the capability to do so, because the pressure generated when you approach the limit is so consistent, so social, so embedded in the relationships that constitute your daily existence, that it is experienced not as an external force, but as internal doubt. The people around you do not say, "You are making us uncomfortable by growing beyond what we have collectively decided is normal." They say, "Are you sure about this? Is this realistic? Different lately? You used to be more fun. What happened to you?" And because these questions come from people whose approval you have historical reasons to value because they are delivered with genuine concern rather than obvious hostility, they register not as the environmental pressure they actually are, but as legitimate questions deserving genuine reconsideration. They are not legitimate questions deserving reconsideration. They are the carrying capacity asserting itself. They are the environment communicating through the most socially effective channel available, that your growth is creating friction, and the friction would be resolved by your return to baseline. You are not required to resolve the friction by returning to baseline. You are not disloyal for outgrowing the assumptions of people who decided your ceiling before you had the information to evaluate whether their assessment was accurate. You are not cruel for becoming something that the environment you started in was not designed to contain. The most important relationships in your life, the ones worth protecting, the ones that constitute real loyalty and real mutual investment, will survive your growth, will adapt to it, will in many cases be elevated by it. The people who genuinely care about you are capable of caring about a version of you that is larger than the version they originally met. The relationships that cannot survive your growth were never built on your actual self. They were built on your limitation. And you do not owe your limitation perpetual residence in your life simply because certain relationships were constructed around it. Let me tell you what I understand about consistency that almost no motivational content will tell you because it is not inspiring. It does not produce the feeling of elevation that content is designed to produce. It does not generate the dopamine response of a powerful revelation. It is simply true. Consistency is not exciting. By definition, by mechanical necessity, the repetition of the same action in the same direction for longer than feels immediately rewarding. It is the daily execution of a process whose outputs are not yet visible. The continued investment in a compounding system before the compound interest has begun to show. The maintenance of standards and behaviors on the days when the motivation is absent. The results are not materializing, and every reasonable argument says that a single day of deviation will not matter. It will not matter on that day. It matters because of what the decision to deviate communicates to the system that is running you. Every time you maintain the standard when it is difficult, the standard becomes more stable. The identity that the standard represents becomes more solid. The internal evidence that you are the person who does this thing regardless of circumstances grows by one more data point. Every time you deviate, not catastrophically, not dramatically, just quietly, just this once, just today, the opposite happens. The standard becomes slightly less stable, the identity slightly less solid. The internal evidence that your commitment is conditional, rather than absolute, grows by one more data point. Neither of these effects is large in isolation. Both of them are decisive in aggregate. The person who has maintained their standard imperfectly, incompletely, but consistently enough across enough days has built something internal that is qualitatively different from the person who has been negotiating with themselves daily. Not quantitatively different, not a matter of degree. A different kind of person. A person whose relationship with their own commitment is stable enough that the question of whether to execute on a given day is not actually a question. It is simply what happens, the way breathing happens, not requiring decision, not requiring motivation, not contingent on whether the day is going well or the results are currently visible or the people around them are supportive. It simply happens because it was decided, and the decision was made completely enough that it does not need to be remade daily. That is the destination of consistency. Not the impressive results, though those follow. The person who no longer needs to decide. Here is the final thing I will tell you. Not as inspiration, as instruction. The life you want, the version of yourself you have glimpsed in the rare moments of unusual clarity when noise was temporarily quiet, and something deeper than your daily self-concept spoke with a certainty that your ordinary thinking does not possess, that life is not separated from your current reality by talent you do not have. It is not separated by luck you have not received. It is not separated by circumstances that need to change, or resources that need to arrive, or people who need to recognize something in you before you can begin. It is separated by a decision, one decision, not decision to try. Trying contains within its structure the permission to stop when the difficulty exceeds the motivation. Trying is conditional. Trying is the language of someone who has not yet decided, who is testing the waters, evaluating whether the cost is worth the price, maintaining the option to withdraw if the answer is no. Not the decision to work harder. Harder is a quantity adjustment. More of the same direction, the same approach, the same fundamental orientation applied with greater intensity. Harder without precision is just faster movement toward the wrong destination. The decision to become, completely, without the escape route of partial commitment. Without the strategic ambiguity that allows you to refrain the outcome if it falls short of the intention. Without the performance of transformation that requires an audience to feel real, the announcement, the declaration, the public commitment that substitutes social pressure for internal decision and therefore collapses the moment the social pressure is removed, the decision made in private and silence, in the cold, clear, unwitnessed space where the only thing present is you and the truth about what you are and what you are choosing, made with enough completeness that it does not require renewal tomorrow, does not require the right circumstances to activate, does not require anyone else's understanding or agreement or support to remain in force. A decision that is simply settled, the way everything that is actually permanent settles, not with drama, not with the emotional intensity of a moment that feels significant because it feels significant, with the quiet, cold, total finality of something that has been fully thought through, fully accepted and fully chosen. You are done being the version of yourself that operates below your capability. Not trying to be done, not working toward being done, not planning to be done once the right moment arrives. Done. Now. In this moment, silence was here when you started. It is here now. It will be here after you finish, after you set this down and return to the noise of your daily existence and the people and obligations and distractions that constitute the surface of your life. But something has shifted in the silence. Something that if you were reading with the honest part of your mind rather than the part that consumes content without contact will not shift back. Not because these words were powerful, because you were ready. Ready to stop pretending that the version of yourself you have been presenting to the world is the complete version. Ready to stop protecting the potential that has been waiting, with more patience than you deserved, for you to stop being afraid of it. Ready to stop living inside the assessment of people who evaluated you before you had become what you are. Capable of becoming and whose verdict you have been honoring long past the point where it had any accuracy. You are not what they decided you were. You are not the ceiling that the early evidence suggested. You are not the sum of your almost starts, and your careful retreats, and your strategic ambiguities, and your performances of effort, without genuine investment. You are what you decide to be, completely, starting now, without the requirement that anyone else recognize it before it is real. It is already real, and the decision has already been made. Most people will read this. A smaller number will feel it. Fewer still will let it change something. And a very small number, the ones for whom this was always intended, will fold it into themselves completely. Will carry it not as inspiration but as instruction. Will walk out of this silence and into their life as a different person than the one who entered. Not dramatically, not visibly, quietly. The way everything real changes, from the inside. Be the quiet ones, be the ones who decided. Ready for because you spent the time it wasn't watching becoming something it had never seen. Ayanokoji Kiyotaka counting words of complete speech bro abhai by 4,237 words high, 6,500 ki liai 2,263 words or chehi. Main abhai remaining sections ad karta hun speech main nay powerful topics ki soth jo Ayanokoji style main perfectly fit han. Speech continuation directly after you were taught to be. Section keyboard seamlessly flow karta high. Let me tell you something about the word potential that nobody in your life has ever been honest enough to say. Potential is not a gift, potential is a debt. When you say someone has potential, when you feel inside yourself that you are capable of more than your current output suggests, you are not receiving a compliment. You are being handed an obligation. A specific, non-negotiable obligation to the version of yourself that exists at the ceiling of what you are capable of, the version that is waiting, with diminishing patience for the version currently operating below it to close the distance. Most people experience their potential as a source of comfort, as evidence that they are more than their current results suggest, as the private knowledge that if they really tried, if the circumstances were right, if the timing was perfect, if the obstacles were fewer, they would produce something worthy of what they know they contain. This is perhaps the most dangerous relationship with potential that exists, because potential experienced as comfort as a reserve of capability that can be drawn on at any time, that proves your worth independent of your output, becomes the primary reason the output never materializes. You do not need to prove what you are capable of when the knowledge of what you are capable of already feels like proof. You do not need to build the thing when the knowledge that you could build the thing provides most of the psychological reward of having built it. This is the trap. And it is perfectly constructed because it uses your actual capability, your genuine, non-delusional awareness of what you contain as the mechanism of your own paralysis. The way out of the trap is not to doubt your capability. The way out is to stop allowing the awareness of your capability to substitute for its expression. Potential unrealized is not a reserve. It is a loss. Every day that passes with the gap between what you are and what you are capable of being unchanged, that day is subtracted from a total that has a fixed number. And the number decreases whether or not you are paying attention to it. The debt comes due for everyone, without exception, without regard for whether the debtor was aware of the terms or spent their entire life in comfortable denial of them. The question is not whether you will eventually answer for the gap between your potential and your output. The question is whether the answer you give when the accounting finally happens will be one you can sit with. I have structured my entire existence around ensuring that my answer will be yes. I suggest you begin structuring yours the same way. There is a concept I want to install in your thinking permanently. Not because it is new, it is not new. Because it is true in a way that most people encounter intellectually, but never internalize completely enough to change how they actually operate. The concept is this: the person you are in private is the only person you actually are. Everything else, the version you present in public, the performance you give in social contexts, the carefully managed image constructed for the consumption of people whose opinion you have decided matters, that is not you. That is a role. Sophisticated, consistent, internally coherent, but a role nonetheless. A character assembled from the raw material of what you are and shaped by the requirements of the audience you are performing for. The person in private alone, unobserved, with no audience and therefore no performance requirement, that person is the truth. And the gap between the private person and the public person, the distance between who you are when nobody is watching and who you present yourself to be when they are, is the most accurate measure of integrity available. Not integrity in the moralistic sense, integrity in the structural sense. The degree to which the internal and external versions of yourself are the same thing. The degree to which the person you are in private is someone you would be willing to perform in public, not because the performance would be impressive, but because there is no longer a meaningful difference between the performance and the reality. Most people's private person would not survive public exposure, not because they are dishonest, because the private person contains the negotiations with the voice, the quiet abandonments of the standard, the small daily unwitnessed decisions to take the easier option, the comfort, self-deceptions that are only possible when no one else is there to contradict them. The private person is where the real work happens, or doesn't happen. And everything the public person eventually produces, every result, every achievement, every output that the world eventually evaluates, is simply the public expression of what the private person has been building, or not building, in the hours that nobody saw. This is why I work the same way whether I am observed or not. Not because I am performing consistency for an imaginary audience, because I understand that the private hours are not practice for the real thing. The private hours are the real thing. The public results are simply what happens when enough private hours have accumulated in the right direction. There is no shortcut between private and public. There is no way to construct impressive public results from an unimpressive private process. The external is always, eventually, an accurate reflection of the internal. Always, build accordingly. I want to say something about failure that will contradict everything comfortable you have been told about it, and replace it with something true. Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is the process through which success is manufactured, not metaphorically, mechanically, in the actual specific physical sequence of events through which a person moves from not being able to do something to being able to do it. Failure is not an interruption to that sequence. It is the majority of the sequence. Every skill that exists was built through the repetition of failure. Every capability that looks, from the outside, like natural talent was on the inside the accumulated output of a process that contained more failure than success, more wrong attempts than right ones, more moments of not yet than of finally. The difference between the person who develops the capability and the person who does not is not the amount of failure they encounter. Both encounter approximately the same amount. The difference is what they do with it. The person who develops the capability treats failure as information, as specific, targeted, immediately applicable data about what did not work and therefore what to adjust. They process it quickly, extract what is useful, discard the emotional residue, and proceed with the adjustment applied. The person who does not develop the capability treats failure as verdict, as a judgment about their fundamental aptitude, as evidence that confirms the worst version of their self-assessment, the version that was always waiting, always prepared to be confirmed, always ready to argue that the attempt was doomed from the beginning. The failure was identical in both cases. The processing was completely different, and the processing is a choice, not an easy choice, not a choice that becomes automatic without effort. A trained response deliberately built through the decision to, every single time failure occurs, treat it as data rather than verdict, even when the emotional weight of it feels like a verdict, even when the people around you are treating it like a verdict, even when every instinct in your biology is filing it under confirmation of inadequacy. You override the filing. You extract the data, you apply the adjustment, you proceed. This is not resilience in the motivational poster sense. This is a specific, learnable, repeatable cognitive skill, the skill of processing failure efficiently that is the single most important determinant of whether a capable person eventually produces what they are capable of producing. Develop it deliberately. Practice it on every small failure before the large ones arrive, because the large ones will arrive, and when they do, you need the processing to be automatic. You need the extraction of data to happen faster than the construction of verdict. You need the adjustment to be applied before the emotional weight has time to solidify into a story about you. Fundamental limitations. That speed, that efficiency of failure processing is not given. It is built. Build it now. The silence is still here. It was here when you started. It will be here when you finish. It will be here tomorrow when the noise returns and the people return and the daily obligations reassert themselves with their usual insistence that the immediate is more important than the important. But you will carry something into that noise that you did not have when you entered this silence. Not motivation. Motivation is weather, not inspiration. Inspiration is the feeling pleasant, temporary, entirely unreliable as a foundation for sustained action. Something colder. Something more structural. Something that does not require the right feeling to remain in force and does not dissolve when the feeling changes. The clear, precise, honest understanding of exactly what has been happening, of the mechanism that has been operating, of the voice in the cage in the almost starts, and the carried capacity in the private person who is the only real person in what that private person has been building, or not building, in the hours that constituted your life until this moment. You cannot unknow what you now know. And knowledge, real knowledge, the kind that has been honestly faced rather than intellectually processed and quietly shelved, demands a response. Not a dramatic response. Not a public transformation that announces itself before it has earned the announcement. A private response, the only kind that counts, made in the silence. Held in the silence. Executed daily in the silence in the unwitnessed hours where the real autobiography is written one choice at a time. The world will see it eventually. Results are not permanently hideable. Capability consistently applied eventually produces output that cannot be explained away, dismissed, or attributed to luck by even the people most motivated to minimize it. But that is not why you do it. You do not do it for the world to see. You do it because the private person, the only real person, has finally been seen clearly enough and has finally decided with enough completeness that the gap between what they are and what they are capable of being is no longer acceptable, not negotiable, not reducible to a more comfortable size through the careful management of expectations, simply not acceptable. And that decision made privately, held privately, executed daily in the hours no one witnesses is the beginning of everything that comes after. Most people will read this. A smaller number will feel it. Fewer still will use it. And a very small number, the ones for whom this was always intended, will fold it into themselves completely. Will carry it not as inspiration, but as instruction. Will walk out of this silence and into their life as a different person than the one who entered. Not dramatically, not visibly, quietly. The way everything real changes, from the inside. Quiet ones, be the ones who decided. Be the ones the world was not ready for, because you spent the time it was not watching becoming something it had never seen. Dark anime speeches, Ayanokoji Kiyotaka continuation script, 2,500 words. The most dangerous person in any room is not the loudest. It is the one who has already decided what they are willing to become. Let me tell you something about the nature of time that most people understand. Intellectually, but almost nobody has genuinely internalized at the level where it changes behavior. Time does not feel finite until it suddenly is. This is not a poetic observation. It is a description of a specific cognitive limitation the human brain's consistent, documented, almost universal failure to experience the future as real, with the same weight and immediacy that it experiences the present. The present is visceral. It has texture, sensation, emotional weight. The discomfort of doing the difficult thing right now is fully felt in the body, in the resistance, in the immediate cost of the effort. The future is abstract. It exists as a concept, a projection, a story the mind tells about what will happen if certain choices are made consistently over time, but it does not feel the way the present feels. The reward of who you will become if you execute consistently for the next 3 years does not register in the nervous system with the same immediacy as the comfort of stopping right now. And so consistently, predictably, across almost every human being in almost every moment of decision, the present wins. Not because people are irrational, because the brain is operating exactly as designed, weighting immediate, concrete, fully felt experience more heavily than distant, abstract, conceptually understood consequence. The problem is that life is built in those moments of decision. Every moment in which the present wins over the future, in which the immediate comfort outweighs the distant reward, is a moment in which the gap between where you are and where you are capable of being either holds steady or widens. And every moment in which the future wins, in which the abstract reward of who you are becoming is given more weight than the concrete comfort of stopping, is a moment in which that gap narrows, imperceptibly, one decision at a time. But decisions compound. And compounding, given sufficient time and sufficient consistency, produces results that are not imperceptible at all. The person who has consistently over years given the future slightly more weight than the present in the moments that mattered, that person does not look slightly different from the person who consistently did the opposite. They look entirely different. Because the compound effect of thousands of small decisions in the right direction does not produce a small result. It produces a transformed life. The question is not whether you understand this. You understand this. The question is whether you have made the future real enough, specific enough, visceral enough, present enough in the actual moment of decision to compete with the immediate pull of the present. If you have not, the present will keep winning, and the gap will keep holding. Make the future real. Not as a distant concept you visit occasionally in moments of motivation and then set aside when the decision point actually arrives. As a presence, as something you carry into every moment of choice. As the specific, detailed, fully imagined version of who you will be if you choose correctly, and who you will remain if you do not. Carry it with you and let it vote. I want to talk about the specific way that most people relate to their own goals, because there is a pattern in this relationship that is so common, so consistent, and so completely destructive that I am surprised it is not discussed more directly. Most people treat their goals as destinations, as fixed points in the future toward which they are traveling, and upon arrival at which something will be resolved. Some internal incompleteness will be addressed. Some questions about their own adequacy will be answered. State of being that they cannot fully access in their current circumstances will become available. When I achieve this, I will feel that. When I have built this, I will be that. When I reach this point, the version of me that I am trying to become will finally fully exist. This is perhaps the most expensive misunderstanding available to a human being. Because the state of being they are projecting onto the destination, the sense of completeness, adequacy, arrival, is not located at the destination. It is not located anywhere external. It is a quality of relationship with oneself that either exists in the present or does not exist at all, and that is built, if it is built, through the process of moving toward meaningful goals, not through the achievement of them. The achievement of a goal produces a specific temporary satisfaction, real, earned, worth experiencing, that lasts for a period and then dissolves back into the baseline state of whoever achieved it. If the baseline state is one of incompleteness, of the persistent feeling that arrival at the next destination will finally resolve the question, the dissolution of the achievement's satisfaction simply reinstates that incompleteness, and the person looks toward the next destination, and the pattern continues. This is why people who achieve extraordinary things by conventional measures often report feeling unexpectedly empty at the moment of achievement. Not because the achievement was insufficient, because they were pursuing the achievement as a solution to an internal condition, and internal conditions are not resolved by external achievements. The resolution, the genuine, stable, non-contingent sense of being adequate to your own existence, is built through the daily practice of operating in alignment with what you actually value. Through the private, unwitnessed, unglamorous consistency of being the person you have decided to be in the moments when it is difficult, not at the destination, the journey, not when you arrive, and how you travel. Understand this completely, and the relationship with goals becomes functional rather than desperate. You pursue the goal because the pursuit develops you, and because the outcome has genuine value. Not because you need the outcome to resolve something in you that the outcome was never capable of resolving. This shift from pursuing goals as solutions to pursuing goals as expressions is one of the most significant psychological changes available to a human being. And it is available now, in your current circumstances, with your current level of achievement, not at the destination. Here, there is a quality I have observed in the people who consistently produce results that others consider impossible, a quality that is less glamorous than talent, less dramatic than determination, less frequently discussed than either. The quality of accurate self-assessment, not harsh self-assessment, not the performance of humility that presents itself as honest evaluation while actually being a defense mechanism, a preemptive self-criticism that reduces the social risk of being criticized by others. Accurate self-assessment, the genuine, undefended, non-emotionally invested ability to look at your current capabilities, your current outputs, your current behaviors, and see them as they actually are. Not as you wish they were, not as you fear they might be, as they actually are. This quality is rarer than almost any conventional talent, because accurate self-assessment requires something that the brain is structurally resistant to, providing a view of yourself that is not filtered through the self-protective distortions that the brain generates automatically to maintain a functional sense of self-worth. The brain does not want to show you yourself accurately. It wants to show you a version of yourself that is sufficiently positive to sustain motivation and sufficiently negative to sustain vigilance, a carefully managed image that keeps you functional without exposing you to the full weight of either your actual limitations or your actual potential. Getting past that management system, seeing yourself with the clarity that accurate self-assessment demands a specific kind of intellectual honesty that has to be deliberately cultivated. The practice is simple to describe and difficult to execute. You ask yourself, about every significant area of your life, one question. If someone who did not know me and had no investment in my self-image evaluated my actual behavior in this area, my actual outputs, my actual consistency, my actual choices, what would they conclude? Not what would they conclude about my intentions, about my behavior, because intentions are not visible and do not produce results. Behavior is visible and produces results. And the gap between your intentions and your behavior evaluated honestly through the eyes of an objective observer is the most accurate measure, available of where the actual work needs to happen. Most people, when they perform this evaluation honestly, discover a gap that is larger than their daily self-concept acknowledges. That discovery is not comfortable, but it is the beginning of accurate navigation. You cannot close a gap you will not see. See the gap, then close it. Something I want to address directly because it operates in almost everyone, and is almost never named with the precision it deserves. The habit of comparing your internal experience to other people's external presentation. You see someone who appears confident and you compare their visible confidence to your internal uncertainty. You see someone who appears to have their life organized and you compare their visible organization to your internal chaos. You see someone who appears to be moving forward with clarity and purpose, and you compare their visible forward movement to your internal experience of confusion and doubt. And the comparison produces a specific damaging conclusion that they have something you lack, that their internal experience matches their external presentation, that the confidence is as complete as it appears, the organization is effortless, the clarity is total. It does not. No one's internal experience matches their external presentation. Everyone without exception, regardless of how composed the presentation, is managing a private interior that contains doubt, confusion, fear, and the persistent low-level uncertainty of being a human being navigating existence without a complete map. The person whose external presentation impresses you is not showing you their internal experience. They are showing you what they have decided to project, and what they have decided to project is not a lie exactly, it is a selection. The presentation of the aspects of their experience that serve their purposes in the current context, with the understanding which everyone who presents publicly develops eventually that the full internal experience is not what the audience requires and not what the moment calls for. You are comparing your unedited internal experience to their edited external presentation, and concluding that the difference represents a genuine gap between what they are and what you are. It does not. It represents the difference between an unedited private experience and an edited public presentation. Everyone has both. The people who appear to function at the highest level are not people whose internal experience is cleaner, quieter, or more certain than yours. They are people who have developed the specific skill of acting effectively in the presence of internal uncertainty, of proceeding despite the doubt, executing despite the fear, presenting clarity externally, while managing complexity internally. That skill, the skill of decoupling your internal state from your external function, is available to you. It is built the same way every skill is built, through practice. Deliberate, repeated experience of taking effective action in the presence of internal states that argue against it. You already know what this feels like. You have already done it. Every time you did something difficult while uncertain whether it would work, you practiced this skill. You did not recognize it as practice. It was. The final thing I want to leave you with is not a conclusion. It is an orientation. A way of standing in relation to everything that comes next, every difficulty, every decision. Every moment in which the version of yourself you are trying to become is tested by the version of yourself you are currently leaving behind. Stand as someone who has already decided, not someone who is deciding, not someone who is trying to decide, not someone who is gathering information and building confidence and waiting for the right circumstances to make the decision feel fully warranted. Someone for whom the decision is already made, completely, without reservation. The conditional clauses and implicit escape routes that most commitments contain. The version of you that is being built in the private hours. The version that executes without requiring optimal conditions. That maintains standards without requiring external confirmation. That processes failure as data, without constructing it as verdict. That version is not a future self you are hoping to become. It is the self you have already decided to be. The gap between your current behavior and that decision is not evidence that the decision was wrong or premature. It is simply the distance that remains to be closed, and it is being closed. One private hour at a time, one unwitnessed decision at a time, one moment of choosing correctly when incorrectly was fully available at a time. This is not dramatic. It was never meant to be dramatic. The most significant transformations in human capability are never dramatic from the inside. They are slow, private, unglamorous accumulations of small, correct choices that eventually produce a person who is structurally, fundamentally, at the level of identity and habit, an automatic response different from the person who began making them. That person is being built right now, in you. In the hours no one is watching. In the decisions no one will record. In the silence, this silence, the one you entered when you began reading, and that has been present through every word since. That is the actual environment of your becoming. Not the performance, not the presentation. The silence. Work in it. And one day, not dramatically, not with announcement, not with the fanfare that the world reserves for things it can see from the outside, you will emerge from it. And what you will have brought with you, the world will not have been expecting. They never expect what was built in silence. That is precisely why it arrives with such complete and total force. You think you're trying hard, but the truth is simpler than that. You are avoiding discomfort. Every time you delay action, every time you choose ease over discipline, you reinforce weakness. You call it stress, pressure, lack of motivation. I call it lack of control. Your mind is not your ally right now, it is your biggest liability. It seeks comfort, distraction, validation, anything that keeps you from confronting reality. And reality is this: nothing changes until you do. You don't need motivation. You need structure. You need discipline so consistent that your emotions become irrelevant. When you feel tired, you act. When you feel distracted, you refocus. When you feel like quitting, you continue anyway. That is control. Most people talk too much because silence exposes them. In silence, you are forced to face your thoughts, your fears, your insecurities. That is why they escape into noise conversations, notifications, constant stimulation. But you will not escape. You will sit in that silence and observe. You will understand yourself without judgment, without excuses, without distortion. And once you understand your weaknesses, you eliminate them, one by one, without hesitation, without emotion. People will misunderstand you. They will think you've changed, that you've become distant, cold, detached. Let them think that. Their perception does not define you. Your consistency does. Your ability to remain calm under pressure does. Emotional reactions are easy. Anyone can get angry. Anyone can complain. Anyone can collapse when things go wrong. Control is rare. Remaining calm when disrespected, focused when distracted, disciplined when tired, that is what separates you. You are not here to be liked. You are not here to be understood. You are here to become effective, to become precise, to become someone who does what must be done regardless of how it feels. Detach from outcomes and focus on execution. If you do what is required consistently, results are inevitable. And if they are delayed, you adapt, not complain. Complaining changes nothing. Adaptation changes everything. The moment you stop reacting emotionally and start responding strategically, your entire life shifts. You see things clearly. You move differently. You stop chasing validation and people begin noticing you without you trying. Not because you demanded attention, but because your presence became undeniable. Controlled, measured, silent. You don't need to prove strength when you embody it. You don't need to explain your mindset when your actions reflect it. Everything becomes simpler when you remove unnecessary emotion. Decisions become clearer. Focus becomes sharper. Progress becomes consistent. And one day, without any dramatic moment, without any announcement, you will realize something has changed. You are no longer easily shaken. You are no longer distracted by small things. You are no longer controlled by impulses. You have become stable. Stability is power. Real power is not loud, it is not emotional, it is not desperate, it is calm, deliberate, and controlled. And once you reach that level, nothing external can control you, because you have finally learned to control yourself.